that I have my panelists for that session, and that session will be moderated by Ms. Wangeci Gitata-Kiriga, who is on her way to join us on stage. What I'd like to do before she comes on stage is just go ahead and read a little bit of her background to understand why Wangeci is at this conference and supporting us to do the work that we're doing, which is to look at transforming lives of Africans through trade and investment, because we believe that the only sustainable way to create wealth on the African continent is through business. So thank you again very much for joining us today for the afternoon session of the Discussing Global Trade. So as we wait for Wangeci to join us, like I mentioned, I'll just go ahead and read her bio so that we understand her background. So Wangeci Gitata-Kiriga is a lawyer by training and a woman champion at heart. With over 10 years of experience in asset management and financial education in the US, she has focused her energy over the last 8 years on rural livelihoods and improvement through certification and trade across Africa as part of senior leadership of fair trade in Africa. Growing up in coffee farming community rooted Wangeci's interest in agriculture, as well as her experience with the vulnerability of farmers. This disadvantaged position of farmers is the narrative that she's working very hard to change and is partnering with different organizations. Wangeci is a market system development expert. She has seen firsthand the difference that fair pricing and inclusive business models can have on farming communities and supply chains. A former representative of the Fair Trade Advocacy Organization board based in Brussels and a board representative of Commonwealth, Georgia, Wangeci believes in using her voice to improve our representation at the table. She's a dynamic facilitator and a panel moderator, and I make a point of using her or asking her to support us in each of the conferences that we've had. This is the 4th conference under the Africa Conference series, and so I thank Wangeci very much. She's inspired by the late Nobel Lieutenant Professor Wangari Maathai, who believed that the hummingbird can play a part no matter how small we are. So Wangeci is currently an advisory board member of KEPROBA Foundation, New Faces, New Voices Champion, and the founder of the Kijani Group. She's leveraging her experience in agricultural trade to contribute to the progress of agri-based households, the Kenya Big Four Agenda, and the SDGs. She's very proud scaling the world's tallest freestanding mountain, Mount Kilimanjaro, and getting to Huru Peak in March 2013. So that's just a brief about Wangeci Gitata-Kiriga, who will be moderating this session. I also see she has just joined in. So Wangeci, welcome. Welcome to this session. I have already introduced you, so I would like you to just come on stage and you can then introduce your panelists. So thank you very much, Wangeci, for supporting us at the Africa Trade Conference.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anne. It's just been an amazing day, and it's lots and lots of amazing topics going on. I acknowledge, unfortunately, I'm seeing one that says my internet is a bit unstable. So hopefully we don't drop off, but if I do, don't worry, I have my backup Wi-Fi to jump in as soon as possible. But this afternoon, my absolute pleasure talking to all these people doing amazing work across the work that they have been doing in their particular lines of business. And I can't wait. I'm really hoping that I don't massacre anybody's name. If I do mispronounce it, please correct me, and I will write it down as phonetically so that we don't make that mistake again. But my panel has Ngozi Oyewole, and we also have Bendi, and we also have Doug BrandKE. So Ngozi is is going to be joining us from West Africa. Jas is here in Kenya with us, and Doug is part of the Global Chamber. And we're going to get right to it with all of them, and we'll give everybody a moment to just tell us a little bit about themselves. And I'm going to say ladies first. And so Ngozi, you're going to be first. If you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself to our listeners this afternoon. Before we go into questions, that would be super wonderful. Please go ahead, Ngozi. And I hope I've said your name right.
You did. Well done. I'm actually coming in from the UK. Yes, I am West African, but I'm coming from the UK.
Aha, but you live in the UK.
Yes, I am. I'm the Vice Chairperson for Commonwealth Business Women's Network, Nigeria. And also a manufacturer. So I operate in a male-dominated industry. So I am a manufacturer of office furniture. And then education, also the board chair of Strategic Women and Youth Institute. So basically, that's who I am.
Wonderful, Ngozi. We're going to talk a little bit more about what having the Commonwealth Chamber means, especially for business today. And of course, you have to give us some examples of what it's like in manufacturing, because you're correct. That isn't an area that has very many women in it. And especially if you're looking at the export space, that is even more rarefied air. So thank you. And I can't wait for us to get into these discussions a little further. I'm seeing that we have, I think it's somebody just logged in on our panel. Jas, I think. I thought I saw his name up there, but let me see if Doug has logged in, and then we can go ahead and introduce him as well. While that is going on, since you're here, Ngozi, why don't we talk a little bit about that? So you're exporting, right? You're exporting. One of the businesses that you have is actually to export African products to the US. Yeah. And on top of that, you're doing this manufacturing of the furniture there in, you can tell us a little bit more whether that manufacturing is happening in the UK or whether it's happening on the continent, but certainly you have played in that export space. So could you tell us a little bit about that experience, and even, how did you, to be honest, if allow me to use this word, as somebody who's just started out in manufacturing, how did you get the courage to begin and to do so, especially for that export market? Ngozi, could you tell us a little bit about how you started?
Thank you, Angie. Nice to be here today. It's just, I'm going to put it together very quickly so I don't take up the whole time. So when I go through my words really fast, forgive me, everybody. That's because we don't have all the time today to say who Ngozi Oyewole is. She has too many skills packed in one. So office furniture for me is something that I've got a very creative mind and a very daring. I defy my doubts and I'm very daring. So I found myself just by chance, not necessarily, I had to be in the US with an organization in Nigeria called SMEDAN, the Small Medium Enterprise Development Organization of Nigeria. And so we had to exhibit. And I thought to myself, I also had a chance to be with women on boards at the United Nations. So they had a fireside chat. I always tell people, when you go anywhere, leave the problems around you and look for opportunities. So that's always something I've always had behind my mind. As soon as I got into the building, people were taking pictures. Ngozi was busy looking for opportunity. Somebody said, why are you going around? I said, let's see what we can get out of here. And she said to me, what do you think you're going to do? We're just going to come in and you're going to speak about gender. I said, no problem. We'll talk about problems women face, but I'm not going to go out of here without that. So I walked into the store. I looked around. I saw every country had something in their store. And I didn't see Nigeria. So I boldly smiled at the lady in a very nice way. And she was admiring my African outfit, which is what I would normally do. When I leave Nigeria for anywhere, I dress up as a true African woman. I don't wear what you're seeing now, you know. So, and she said, oh, I love what you're wearing. I said, oh, that's nice, you know, and all that. And I said, but we don't have any, so what do you do? I said, I'm into furniture. And then she said, oh, so what do you do in America? I quick, said what I had come in for. And I said, would you like to come in for my exhibition? And she said, yes. And that was it. She turned in,
wow.
And that's the story. And so that is a little story of how I started sending things to America at the time. So what I would say to people is, like I said, seeking opportunity, making use of it, and knowing your product. So I said, I looked through export. How am I going to export? I had samples. I was very sincere. She said, oh, can I buy? And I said, no. When I signed in to come into America, I said there were samples. And so I'm not going to sell. So I think your integrity also puts you forward, and people want to do business with you when you're very sincere and you're upfront. So all the items she picked, there are quite a lot. And she said, no, this is a lot. It's about $3,000 worth. And you're asking me for free? I said, yes, because when I signed in the paperwork, I said it was all sample. So if you're keeping them, by all means, go ahead. And the rest is
history.
It's history.
It's amazing. And to imagine that it was just having that gumption and that courage to say, you know what, we're going to have a conversation and I'm going to tell you about what it is that I do and what we have to offer. And, you know, that's just wonderful, because that is what we call courageous leadership. And you displayed that in so many ways. I like this one, what you said about leave the problems behind you and look for the opportunities, because as you demonstrated, those opportunities are there to be found everywhere. I thought I just saw Jasvinder join us, Jasvinder Bendi. I don't know if he is still online or he was having some trouble with his connection. But when he does come back on, we'll also speak to him a little bit too, and we'll hear a little bit about that. But you know, you are also the vice president of the Commonwealth Business Network, right, in Nigeria. And what I would really like to hear from you is, you know, what are some of those, I guess, opportunities that this particular network brings to the table? And the reason I'm also asking that is because, you know, of course, the Commonwealth has the colonial history that it has, yeah? And so much has changed since the establishment of that Commonwealth. And there has also been discussion around, you know, is it still a relevant body when it comes to trade? And is it, or is it something that has been overtaken by different events and different affiliations? Yeah. What's your take on that, Ngozi?
We all know that the Commonwealth is an association of 56 countries with well-established trading relationship with partners that share a common language, democratic principles and rule of law, bilateral costs for trading partners in Commonwealth countries, and about average of 21% plus. So the Commonwealth carries out research into trade policy to promote the trade and development interests of member states, especially small states, and the least developed countries. They bring countries together to discuss and agree on new global issues. Amongst Commonwealth countries, the EU has free trade agreements with countries like South Africa, Cameroon, Zambia, and the 12 Commonwealth members of the Caribbean states. Commonwealth has something it calls Common Connect. That's what they use to make sure that the small states, you know, come together. And then members benefit from being part of that mutually supportive community of independent and sovereign states, you know, aided by more than 80 Commonwealth organizations. And the Commonwealth Secretariat, of course, we know it's a long, like you said, it's been there since 1965. It supports countries achieve development, So they also develop viable strategies to revive and revitalize economies for the benefit and well-being of Commonwealth citizens to achieve the future we want, a future that leaves no one behind. Global and regional collaboration remains imperative. So they also established a Commonwealth working group which provides an integrated advocacy strategy and solutions in addressing economic challenges. The Commonwealth Secretariat they work with Department of International Trade to highlight the significance of the Commonwealth, what they call the Commonwealth advantage. And then they show how it can be harnessed by business to expand trade, share familiar history, language, legal and administrative systems. So, like all Commonwealth countries, we all speak English. So that makes it very easy to trade. They encourage cross-border trade, like digital trade, which involves all international trade in goods or services that are digitally ordered or delivered. They span an area of digital goods, digitally ordered goods, in and out delivered, and so on. So they also have their best practices, like online consumer protection, dispute resolution, market concentration, and competition on digital platforms and cross-border digital payments are all in place. So it's still very active. The Commonwealth, the advantage of the Commonwealth digital trade is the Africa and the digital delivery of creative content. You know how we have the Nollywood in Nigeria? That's a massive business. I think we're the highest over Bollywood in India. And then, so there are lots of activities that the Commonwealth countries are doing and encouraging. With Nollywood, that has cut across the whole world. And that's what the Commonwealth does. It gives you the platform to take off. CBWN Nigeria, which is an organization of the Commonwealth, is an approved organization. What it does is encouraging leadership according to the Commonwealth Charter, women in leadership, encouraging women to be out there, to be outspoken, to use their voice, and also the SDG Goal 5 of women empowerment. You have to speak for yourself. And the way we work is trade, talent. Women are able to trade across any Commonwealth countries. A lot has happened. The Equity Bank in Kenya is actually a Commonwealth project. I'm sure you don't know about that, but it's actually a Commonwealth project that Commonwealth used to reach out to businesses to start off. And today, we all know what Equity Bank is doing in Kenya, encouraging women, encouraging businesses. Those are Commonwealth projects that people may not know. And those things function through what you call, like I said earlier, Commonwealth Connect. So yes, the Commonwealth is still working. We also have the ICT service trade. And then look at Rwanda. Rwanda now, they have the freight forwarding service. So they give, is also Commonwealth. They give cheap airlines, cheap freighting services to intercontinental trade. So if you want to trade between Rwanda and any part of the continent, African continent through the AFCFTA, you get a reduced rate. So it's also a Commonwealth country. They also have the CHOGM, where you have the heads of government come together and they discuss bilateral policies on bilateral trade agreements. So yes, the Commonwealth is really working seriously to make sure trade is happening well. A lot of activities based on like the bilateral data in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, that's the OECD, and the World Trade Organization. Those things are where the Commonwealth is still functioning so much. So in summary, Commonwealth countries leverage on digital technologies, they utilize trade agreements, they promote services, cooperation, improve connectivity to boost their trade. The Commonwealth advantage has helped to build, strengthen, sustain trading relationship, factors such as, like I said earlier, historical ties, familiar, legal, and administrative systems, the use of largely one language, and that's English, as a means of communication with the foreign partners, and large and dynamic diaspora underpin this advantage, which is particularly significant for trade in services. The Commonwealth advantage, if you ask me, if you don't know, it implies that Commonwealth member countries have an average of 19% lower trade costs in their bilateral trade than in trade with non-member countries. So on average—
That's quite a significant percentage.
Yeah, so on average, the bilateral trade costs between the Commonwealth country pairs are lower, to the tune of around 21% compared with the cost of trading with non-Commonwealth countries. So the trade cost advantage holds for both agriculture products and manufactured products. So, you know, I know America has AGOA, but then the Commonwealth has been able to really put a lot together, and it's working. They've also been able to, we have what you call the Commonwealth, for CBWN, we have CA Africa. And the COO actually comes from Kenya, Nana Wanjao. She comes from, that's the COO for Commonwealth Business Women Africa. So what we've done is the 19 Commonwealth countries, every member state, the women have come together to form like a Pan-African organization where we actually do business together. So every year we move from one country to the other. So when that's happening, there's that cross-border, there's that cross-trade, there's that oneness, and that encourages trade. There's, you know, also we've been able to tackle issues like counterfeiting, which is mostly a big issue, where you have people flooding in the country, the continent, with fake goods and services, or fake goods. A lot of people bringing things from China. That now is being curbed, because in Africa, we're beginning to be very self-sufficient and sustainable. We do things within our continent. Like I said, when I travel, I do not wear, I'm not being racist. I love my African prints. I love my hair in braids. I love to look very ethnic. It's easy to identify me. No, don't worry about the light skin. My mother is very light skin. My dad is as dark as a pot. I think I picked up the lighter skin. However, you know, you see it that we're ethnic. We're producing things within the country. If you look around right now, you find that it's a playground. Our dressing is almost blended. Everybody wears a headgear in most of the African countries. Business is working well. And I tell you, the biggest item I sold while I was in America then was the headgear, the turban. The turban. The lady didn't remember the furniture I showed her. What she remembered was the other things that I had brought, were little items that we did through our branding and stuff like that. So
that's beautiful.
That's my take on where the Commonwealth is.
Thank you for that, Ngozi. And I see that we've been joined by Jaswinda. Jaswinda, welcome to this afternoon's session. You're here with us in Nairobi. Well, you're based in Nairobi. I don't know if you're in Nairobi right now, but if you are, I'll give you a few minutes, of course, to introduce yourself to our listeners today. Although I will say that you are the chair of the Kenya Export Promotion and Branding Agency. But if you could just tell our listeners today a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we'll get into the questions, because I have quite a number. So please go ahead, Jaswinda, and introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this kind invitation, which I graciously accepted in my very hectic schedule. But as you're aware, as you introduced me, I am the chair of the Kenya Export Promotion and Branding Agency. But besides that, I run my own businesses. I'm in the cotton, textile, apparel value chain. We have our own plantations of growing cotton for us in Uganda, and we run the whole value chain from field to fashion. We export garments to to the US from Kenya, and we're running a similar operation in Kenya as well. So we export to free trade agreement. This huge opportunity ahead of us with 1.2 billion people and $3.5 trillion economy. So really looking forward to what's up and what's next.
That's fantastic. I mean, I like the fact that you've, I like that phrase, or field to fashion. The fact that you are working across the entire supply chain is pretty remarkable. But you also do find that in, you know, we won't get into the specifics of that, but I remember reading a couple of years ago about how textile and apparel is such a huge potential sector, especially for East Africa. So it's good to hear that that is already happening, that you've got the growing in one country, the manufacturing in another, and then you've got, you know, the whole world that you can supply. But going back to your role under the Kenya Export Promotion and Branding Agency, could you share with us a little bit about the opportunities that you see for African businesses to export more, and not just necessarily in the textile and apparel sector, but you know what you're seeing right now as sort of like the growth areas when it comes to manufacturing on the continent and exporting value-added products across the world?
Okay, just to give you a little brief on Kenya's exports. Textile and apparel exports today from Kenya are the third largest export. Number one being horticulture, floriculture. Number two being tea. As at last year, tea was, during COVID, was our number one export. And the apparel business is, at the moment, is number three. It's overtaken coffee. It's a $500 million business. But as much as we chest thump that we're the largest exporter of apparel from the region, sub-Saharan Africa, it's only 0.5% of the US market. The US market is $100 billion. We are duty-free like many other African countries under the AGOA legislation. But sometimes, you know, I say shame on us that we're only doing 0.5% of the US pie. The size of the pie is huge, and our slice of the pie is very, it's a needle in the haystack. To give you an example, a comparative note, Bangladesh, a small country like Kenya, their exports are $50 billion. They were supposed to hit their $50 billion mark in 2025. They actually hit them in 2021. So it just tells you the huge scope in this business and the amount of jobs that it can create. So the government is very clear. The Kenya government, we're now building a lot more factories. There's a new realization in the world, realization about supply chains, and global supply chains as we speak are getting reorganized. A couple of reasons why this is happening. One is, of course, post-COVID, we had a very strong rebound factor. And also the market access that we have to Europe and to US is duty-free, quota-free. It gives us a competitive and comparative advantage. Now, why are we looking more at the US market as opposed to the European market? Simply, the case is simple. The tariff into the US is very high. It's 16% on cotton goods and 32% on polyester goods. So if you're doing a polyester garment, for every $3, your customer gets $1 back. So it gives you a huge competitive advantage against Asia, that is Vietnam and China and Bangladesh and Laos, Cambodia. So we have a serious competitive advantage in a high tariff business. To Europe, unfortunately, we're not exporting a lot. And the reason is simple, that Europe is duty-free, not only to Africa and most African countries, but it's also duty-free to LDC Asia. LDC Asia is countries like Bangladesh, which have since graduated. So they're also enjoying a duty-free market access to Europe, and they're super competitive. So the duty into Europe on apparel is 8 to 12%. So it's not very high. The extra cost of doing business in Africa actually choose that advantage. So it makes you not so competitive. Okay, then if you look at other value chains, I see opportunity everywhere. I see opportunity in the tea sector in Kenya. And to just give you an example, Kenya grows 450 million kilos of tea, and our export revenue is $1.4 billion. If you compare that with Sri Lanka, they grow 300 million kilos of tea, which is 50% less than ours. and their export revenue is $3.4 billion. And then you ask yourself, what is going wrong here? I mean, why are we earning so little? And it's a very simple answer. We're not doing value-added teas, and all we're doing is Majani chai, just black tea. And it doesn't, we don't brand our tea. So as the agency, we have been mandated now by the president that, listen, guys, it's about time that we do a lot more value addition. It's about time that on the continent we capture the value. And it's not only in tea, it's the same in, like I said, I talked about cotton just now. You look at the same, it's in cocoa. We export 95% of our cocoa and we import chocolates, right? And the same in coffee, we will sell coffee beans and then we will import roasted beans, or we'll sell that same cup in Starbucks at $3 and the farmer is only getting 3 cents of that cup. So I think there's a fundamental shift on the continent. The continent is looking at value addition, and the continent is looking at how can we maximize that raw material that we're so used to extractive industries. We grow and export, and our whole infrastructure over the last 150 years has been built to grow in Africa and export primary. And I think that narrative needs to change, and that's what we're trying to do at KEPROBA, where I am chair at the moment. And I have a tall order. I mean, I was looking at English breakfast tea. There's nothing English about it. There's not a single bush in England, and all of us drink English breakfast tea. And when I did a deep dive, and why is it called English breakfast tea, and why can't, and what is the recipe of English breakfast tea? I realized that the recipe is the British Raj. Basically, it is 1 kilo Assam from India, 1 kilo Ceylon from Sri Lanka, and 1 kilo Kericho from Kenya. And I asked the guys, why do you need a Kenyan component? Why didn't you just blend it in with the 2 Asian countries and sell it as English breakfast tea? And the guy said, sorry, we can't do that. I said, why not? And this is a big company, and I think you know who I'm talking about. And they said, the Kenyan component is crucial. I said, why? They said, because Kenyan component, that 1/3 blend that we put into the English breakfast tea gives us aroma and it gives us color. So if aroma and color are so important in a cup of tea, why are we not maximizing that value advantage that we already have? So lots of examples, lots of opportunities, yes. And I can keep talking on and on and on, but I think I need to pause there because I'm sure you have more questions for me.
That's, I mean, you are talking right now about all these competitive advantages that we have, especially on the continent, right? And closer to home here in Kenya with the examples that you gave us. Continentally, we look at our neighbors, perhaps like Ethiopia, and you have in Ethiopia, they have geographic indicators for their main products, which is coffee. And so you have a requirement that if you are sourcing coffee from a particular region, when that region is stated, when it's over a certain volume and that region is stated, that geographic indicator must be identified. And it is something that the Ethiopian government has patented at the WTO. So when you talk about Ethiopian coffee coming from the Sidama region or coming from the Oromia region, there are those legal requirements that protect the product that also bring additional revenue to the country. And I was just wondering whether that is something that we are looking into as Kenya, because very often you would find that people are talking about having, Kenyan tea or calling it Kenya Safari or talking about having Kenyan coffee, and yet very little of Kenyan coffee has been, or a Kenyan product has been used in the total makeup of that particular recipe. So it would be interesting to just hear your thoughts on that, and whether that is something that you're seeing in different parts of the continent. The same way that the Champagne region says any sparkling wine that comes from there is the only one that's called champagne. Anyone else who's growing the same grapes cannot call it champagne. So do we have something similar like that happening in our sectors in which we have an exceptional product, and how are we presenting that product to the world?
Well, I think it's all to do with intellectual property, and that's what you're talking about. And yes, in the past we have lost the brand Kiondo to the Japanese, and it's it's a basket that these SMEs are actually weaving. And also the Kikoi brand was under threat with somebody registering it in the UK. So I think by and large, we hardly protect our intellectual property, and that is what we're trying to do now, and we're trying to get a bit more careful. And if you look at, you talked about how can we identify our products differently. I think as the branding agency, we are now taking that as a lead position. We're trying to tell the world that there is a difference. And most of us are now going for value propositions as opposed to selling propositions. So if you ask me, what is your USP? I'll be polite in telling you we don't have a USP. And I think you know where to go for a USP, because those countries just sell, sell, sell. But we're coming to a situation, we want to move a USP to a UVP, meaning what is your unique value proposition? So I'll give you an example. In the cotton space, I've got, in my own plantations, we're doing a brand called Cotton Made in Africa. Laura Chaplin, who's the granddaughter of Charlie Chaplin, she's our brand ambassador. So we're trying to use strong brand ambassadors, trying to talk about traceability, trying to talk about sustainability, because all the supply chains in the world today, everybody wants a component of sustainability. You've seen what's happening in Sharm el-Sheikh with COP27, and the whole new value proposition is about traceability, sustainability, circularity, and verticality. And I think that's where we're taking Kenya into a new position. We've got 93% of our energy mix is now renewable energy. And if we can put that into your shirt, and if you have a label at the back of your shirt saying that this shirt is used making green energy, straight away it should actually help you sell more, because the world is getting a little bit more conscious. Every consumer, and it's got to be consumer driven. Tomorrow's consumer is very different to yesterday's consumer. Yesterday's consumer wanted price. Tomorrow's consumer wants value. It's a big difference between price and value.
And that takes me very nicely to the next question, which I'm going to ask to you, and also Ngozi, if you could just jump in and talk a little bit about that. I really like what you said about the value proposition and the fact that we are, we have an opportunity to really take a value position in how we are growing our market and growing the brand. So with all of these different, this narrative of African businesses changing in the world, how could you share with us some of these opportunities that you're seeing there? How we can increase, again, the value addition that is happening on the continent, and what is it that we can, how do we build these African brands that we're then introducing into the world, as opposed to being the, I guess, sort of like the brand takers, right? Why can't, again, coffee is the best coffee in the world is found in East Africa, and dare I say mainly in Kenya. But how can we then now grow African brands that we are then sharing with the rest of the world based on these different values and these unique features that we have on the continent. So I'll start with Ngozi, if you would tell us a little bit about how you see that happening, and then Jasvinda, if you could just jump in and talk a little bit about the brand positioning the African brand. We'd really like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, first of all, the product is a critical factor in deciding, for instance, your export markets. You have to select a market, keeping the demand for your export product in mind. If you heard him, what he said was very, very clear. And then the product should address the need and requirements of the consumer. You also need an export plan. If you're going to do anything across any continent, or like through AGOA or through the Commonwealth, you have to have an export plan, which is a business plan for selling internationally. You've got to know the rules. It should detail the decisions you've made based on your market research, your objectives, how you plan to achieve them, your export. It should show banks, investors, partners that are serious and have realistic and achievable goals. So you have to have that structure in place. That shows you that you can maximize your products, export potential, identify your risk, minimize them, set out pricing strategy, present clear evidence for funding and finance, make choices and set targets. using data. Data is very important. So what you have to have proper knowledge of your business. You can't achieve anything unless you're able to show the target market how you're going to adapt your product. He talked about renewable energy. He talked about the climate. So let's say for any manufacturer, you have to think of what your raw materials, how you're going to source it. How does that affect climate change? You have to go with trend of things, market approaching, cost and pricing, funding and credit. How do you get paid? You travel. You have to have a travel plan, and then there's no business without risk. So you have to think of your business risk. Then you're ready to take off. But there's something I have never taken for granted when it comes to, especially my experience. He's talking about coffee. I'm talking about my experience and how I got into the export business. I mean, they're not different, but they're just different product lines. And there's something I always tell people, which is, it might look very little, but it's very useful, the power of social media. I mean, you take it for granted, but the old marketing mediums in import-export business only sent to limited people, so the conversation is just one way. On the other hand, on social channels, consumer and businesses have a two-way interaction. The import-export business can communicate with each other by answering online questions, working on strengthening bond, as well as, again, posting the content. You must first know your import-export business, like I said earlier. Target your customers. It's necessary you make a business account on platforms that your potential customer base uses so that they can be in touch with you, do proper analysis to determine the most used sites, and with a well-built plan, you can conquer them well. So these things are really, really important. They look very small, but they add up and they help you in your business. So coffee, yes. For me, in the furniture industry, there's no way you can carry a huge desk or table and then say you're flying it across to one country. But when you set it up as in a video, you do the video or YouTube, and they see your content and they have a proper outlay, they see what you're doing. Obviously, people are interested in what you're doing. And then you have to also look at what are the, you have to look at the statutory requirements, regulations of the different countries. That's where the AFCFTA is been such a fantastic, it's coming on very well. It hasn't taken off totally, but I say there is hope for it, because what are we trying to achieve? A borderless trading, where we can go into South Africa, supply things, come out of there, and so on. And I don't think they've done badly, especially with their payment, PAPSS payment platform. So those are the kind of things that interregional, because you have to do interregional before you can think of doing the global business. I mean, I had a good laugh at what he said about the English coffee. It's a takeaway for me today. I'm never going to forget that speech. You know,
English tea.
English tea. I'm not going to forget that in a hurry. Very interesting.
Thank you for that, Ngozi. I like what you said about, you know, with the right use of technology, you can conquer the world. And you know, and that's really encouraging, because sometimes it can seem very daunting. You know, you look at some of the numbers that that Jaswinder just talked about. When you start to look at the size of the market that is out there and what's available, but you know, every little bit counts. And even if right now Kenya's third largest export is textile and apparel, and it's only 0.5, it's a sliver of the US market, but there's this huge opportunity that's still out there. But again, going back to this question of how can we create African brands that can go out there and conquer the world. Jaswinder, what do you think we need to do to do that?
Thank you. I think Time has come that we start selling our identity as opposed to selling somebody's identity. And English breakfast tea is a classical example, which is nothing English about it. But yes, we all drink it very proudly every morning and say, wow, I'm drinking English breakfast tea. So what does Africa need to do, and how do we change the narrative? I think we need to start branding the continent. We need to start branding Africa. We need to start having a deliberate plan of buying African. And that's the time we will actually build Africa. So the 3 Bs, right? Brand, buy, build. And really, that's what we need to do. And you will start seeing all of a sudden, I mean, you can see today, Louis Vuitton the other day, they were actually showcasing a Masai Shuka as their new collection. To me, that's my intellectual property. Masai Shuka is very Kenyan, and it should have had a Kenyan twist to it. So as we start getting more and more protective with our intellectual property, I mean, look at Safaricom and M-Pesa, for example. I mean, the whole world knows that M-Pesa was a creation by some Kenyans who really could not be bothered to go home and give their grandmother money every weekend because it was an issue, right? So they adopted technology and innovation. And I think it was then rolled out globally. The brand, of course, in different countries is called different, but it's the same thing. It's M-Pesa. But did Kenya get the dividend, the innovation dividend? No, because we sold it on to our shareholders in Safaricom, who are Vodacom, who then sold it on to the entire world. So we need to be a little bit careful with the small print in all the joint ventures that we do. And if there is any discovery due to innovation like M-Pesa, then surely we need dividend. We need innovation dividend, we need brand dividend, and we need to start very strongly talking about our brands and starting building companies which are strong brands. And I think it's not impossible. I mean, the rest of the world, most of them don't have the resource that we have. We are the richest planet and yet the poorest planet, purely because we've not added value on our primary raw materials, and that narrative is changing fast. We have a young continent, the average maiden age of 19, and you can see what a young population can do to mobilize. We are more technological savvy than anybody else I know on the continent. I mean, I was speaking to some people in Washington in an AGOA forum setting, and I told them, guys, you know, our grandmothers are so intelligent, they buy 2 kilos of potatoes on a phone. And I think our grandmothers are more intelligent than yours. I mean, I was joking. And the guy said, what are you saying? How can you be so blunt? And I said, I don't think your grandmother knows how to do an SMS. My grandmother buys 1 kilo of potatoes in the village on a digital platform. So surely speaking, it tells you that our way of doing business is very different. I mean, we're now all talking on this digital platform, but we're connecting the entire continent and the entire world. So there's so much to do and so little time. And all of us need to just start running and say, guys, let's move on and let's create the strong African brands which everybody wants.
Absolutely. I like that what you said about brand, buy, and build. I see that we have a question in the Q&A. We'll answer that question, and then after that, yes, Ngozi.
Yes, I
yes.
think I didn't point out to you that the furniture was typical Nigerian local furniture of carved. They're not the regular furniture like you may be thinking. They're all very like carvings. The chairs that are the local ones we use in the villages, the recliner ones, the stools with animal prints on them, carvings on them. So they're strictly Africa, or proudly Nigeria, locally made branded furniture, not the regular ones that we're thinking of. So just to let you know that the branding of where the furniture was coming from was properly laid out, yes. So for you to be in the United Nations, you need to be able to showcase something that showcases your country. So the furniture that was out there were typical Nigeria branded furniture.
That's fantastic, and then that's what needs to be that identity or that thumbprint. You know, it's like the way you were talking about African print or even the Masai Shuka. The minute you see it, you know where it's from, right? And so it's the same thing with the furniture that you're talking about. The minute anybody sees it, they'll know They may not be clear which particular country it is, but they will know immediately that it is African furniture. And that that artisanal bent that is going into all the work that we do is something that we need to highlight and to showcase. But let's make sure that we answer this question that was put here on the chat. And one attendee is asking, what kind of green energy is used for manufacturing? And what's the cost of this energy? Jacinda, would you like to touch on that? Because I think you raised the question of the renewables in Kenya.
Yeah, well, I've already answered that question. It's largely solar and geothermal from Olkaria, where we're getting the steam coming out of the ground. So that's all renewable energy. We have 10,000 megawatts in there. Yes, the cost of solar is a bit high, and the cost of renewables are a little high. But then look at the cost of fossil fuels and the price that we are paying. We've just had 2.5 million cattle livestock who have died in northern Kenya because of a drought and because of climate change. So which cost is lower? You know, the long-term cost of climate change is far higher than the short-term high cost of solar, renewable. So in the long term, if you actually look at it in terms of impact to the planet, and I think we're all becoming tree huggers, as I would call it, and we really need to start thinking different. And that's the value proposition I'm talking about. If I tell you today that you got a newborn baby, please don't use normal cotton t-shirts and baby wear, use organic baby wear. And the reason I give you is that the organic baby wear will not give your newborn baby any skin rash. I put fear into you. So the most powerful tool of marketing is fear. And if I charge you $10 for that t-shirt or that baby wear, as opposed to $5, which is what you would have paid for a normal one, you'd actually pick that more expensive one, because I've actually told you the advantage of going organic cotton as opposed to going conventional cotton. So when you sell a story, and I think every product that Africa does, we need to start storytelling. We are very bad at storytelling, and marketing and branding is all about storytelling. And without storytelling, you can actually, price becomes a significant second pointer and not the primary pointer. The primary pointer becomes the story.
I mean, and that's
the point of sale, I mean.
Yes, and you know, I think that's something that we need to go back to, right? Because for sure, across the continent, in all the cultures, whether they are the storytelling is at the heart of everything. Yeah, there's such oral history, whether it's in music or in actually just telling those stories, that history, those fables. All of that goes back to the story. So how do we, as you said, how do we capsulize that, yeah, and use it to tell that brand story of African brands and what it is that we are giving to the world, and what is it that we are sharing with the rest of the world, in as much as even in just how we do business, as you pointed out. You know, Kenya has over 95% of our grid energy is renewable energy. I think that there are very few, I don't know whether there are any other countries in the world that can say that that's where they are with that, especially when it does come to the grid. So I'm looking at the time right now. What I'm going to ask you all both of you to do is to just give us your, let's call it your parting shot for this afternoon. We'll start with you, Ngozi. What would what's your parting shot to our listeners this afternoon?
It's been a pleasure being on this particular conversation. Very interesting. Thank you, Wangi. But I always tell everybody and every woman, especially because I'm a very strong female advocate when it comes to, he was talking about storytelling. Your voice is your superpower. Defy your doubts. Defy all odds. Go for it. When I walked out there, I went out looking for an opportunity, and I got it, and I ran with it. And I sat down and looked at where I am, and used what I have as the head of Commonwealth and the women who are into various skills. Leading them is not a joke. And talking to them and telling them, fear, you need to conquer your fear. Yeah, in any way anybody puts the fear across to you, conquer your fear, defy your doubts, go for it, look for opportunities, and you're home and dry. Sell your talent, sell your skills.
Thank you, Ngozi. Your voice is your superpower. I like that. Jasvinda, what is your parting shot to us today?
Well, my parting shot would be that, and I have used this even yesterday when President Ramaphosa, we had this business forum, Kenya and South Africa, because we're trying to increase the trade. And as you know, from 1st January, Kenyans will be allowed to go to South Africa visa-free. So we, as a continent, have so much in common. And unfortunately, we put a lot of barriers of trade, all sorts of things. And I can give you lots of stories, but there's one story that I would like to share. It happened to me in 2011 in Zambia. I was at the AGOA Forum, and I was fortunate enough to actually have dinner with Secretary of State at that time, Hillary Clinton. And there was a Zambian minister called Felix Mutati. And we ordered a steak for dinner, and the first bite of that steak in Secretary of State was, wow, amazing steak. This is what she said, Hillary Clinton. And this is a true story. And I kicked the minister under the table, and he started looking at me. He said, yeah, Zambian steak is very good. And so I'm very happy. And I pulled him aside later on. I said, Minister, what did the Secretary of State of the United States say? She said, amazing steak. I said, yes. But what does that mean? He says, no, we have beef, good beef. I said, hey, hold on. You're missing the point here. Tomorrow morning, we've got the AGOA Forum starting. Right now, African beef under phytosanitary rules of origin and health and safety is not allowed into the US. And this is your opportunity, because what is good for your Secretary of State should be good for 300 million Americans. You can't put your Secretary of State's life in danger if 300 million Americans are going to be protected. So that was it. He made that statement in the AGOA Forum, and the very next day, they actually removed those barriers of entry, because it's one thing giving you market access, but there's the other thing that you have a non-tariff barrier stopping that access. And that gave Zambian beef a market into the US market. But going back to what I also like to say, the problem with us in Africa, we're all pygmies. All of us are pygmies, and President Museveni uses this all the time. And we are trying to see who is the taller pygmy. We should stop competing with each other and start complementing each other so that you can build world-class companies and world-class operations. And that will only happen once we look at each other as complementers and not competitors. So that to me is a fundamental shift in paradigm we need to have. We are 1.3 billion Africans on the continent today. We will be 2 billion in the year 2040. We are the fastest and youngest growing continent in the world. And you know what? We are soon, with the Continental Free Trade Agreement, we are the single biggest economic trading bloc in the world. So let's do it.
That one needs a physical clap. I'm so excited. I think that this has just been amazing. Thank you both for giving your time, for speaking so passionately, because I feel this energy. You are as passionate about our continent as I am and as Anne is, and that's why she keeps putting these conferences together, because she's like, the talent is all here. And we can make this happen. As you pointed out, Jasvinda, we are young, we are agile, we are educated, we are ambitious, and let us use our voice as our superpower, as we've been reminded by Ngozi. But even more than that, let us remember that we will, I think it's a Nigerian proverb actually, that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that is exactly what Jasvinda has told us, that let us look at each other as complementers and not as competitors. So over to you, Anne, as we build towards this bright future of ours. Actually, it's not just the future, it's right now, it's in this present. And we're seeing those building blocks coming together. And thank you for providing this platform where we can talk about these things and where we can find new partnerships to continue to build and to grow.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much, Wangeci. Thank you. Thank you, Wangeci, for amazing moderation as always. Thank you, Mr. Bendi. Thank you, Ngozi, for sharing your experiences and what you think needs to be done in regards to global trade opportunities. Opportunities are abundant. We just need to position ourselves. And I kept going through, when you're discussing really building the African brand and really being able to position ourselves so that we can take advantage of these trade opportunities globally. So again, thank you very much, Wangeci, for that moderation, and looking forward till next time.